is meaningless. Everything that we do is meaningless. But at the end, it drives home a very important part, a very important point. So I highly encourage you to read that book, or at least if you're not going to read the whole thing, to read the very end of it, because it tells us what we should be doing in life. Like, if nothing we do matters, what should we be caring about? And I find comfort in that even if one day whatever I do is not remembered, at least I have God. So I highly encourage you to read that. Another thing that I think is interesting about this is that it shows us how we get from Joseph to here. And I think it's interesting that we follow the story of Levi's descendants, because as you learn further down, Moses and Aaron are descendants of Levi. They're not descendants of the firstborn, Reuben. They're descendants of Levi. So I thought that was interesting that this book of the Bible chooses to follow the story of Levi's sons instead of Reuben's or somebody more close to the firstborn. So, interesting. I also like this part in here because it mentions cities in Egypt, like chapter 1, verse 11. Towards the middle of it, it says, "And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh." And if we're looking at this from a historical value, that tells us not only where in history we are, which was a long time ago, but it also shows us how real the Bible is. I feel like it gives us a sense of realism. This actually happened. Ramses is a city that we can find today. It's just, I don't know, it just adds so much to the story to me that you know this is real. Something I find, moving on to chapter 2, that I find interesting is that Pharaoh's daughter knew that the baby boy, was Hebrew. It says in chapter 2, verse 6, it says, "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. So she knew that this was one of the Hebrew babies. And yet she still took him in, going against her father's direct order. I find that interesting. And I honestly don't know why she did that, but thank goodness she did. Moses grew up knowing he was a Hebrew, which is interesting to me because Pharaoh must have known that he was Hebrew, and yet Pharaoh still let Moses live. Was that because of his daughter? I don't know, but I find that very interesting that he grew up under Pharaoh's household, and yet he was Hebrew. So the next passage is interesting for Moses' life. It's kind of a pivotal and pinnacle point of his life, because he ends up killing an Egyptian that was beating a Hebrew slave. And something that a pastor had talked to me about that I thought was interesting was in chapter 2, verse 12, it says, "Looking this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand." The pastor brought my attention to the fact that Moses looked this way and that, but he did not look up. He didn't look up to God for guidance. So I thought that was an interesting interpretation of it, because I had always been reading it literally as he was just looking around. There wasn't anybody, so he killed the guy. And I'd like to interpret this as he was doing a good thing. He saw somebody in danger, he was helping them out, even though killing is a sin. But I had never really thought of it as an interpretation Isaac and with Jacob. God doesn't forget. God does not forget things. It wasn't like he forgot all about the Israelites and suddenly remembered them. No. That's not the case. What I think we should focus on is the next verse, when it says God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. God never forgets us. He consistently and constantly loves us. But it was in his timing for him to start putting his plans into motion. That's how I would like to interpret this, but perhaps you have a different interpretation. We then go to Moses in the burning bush. And I was reading this and I was thinking that really would be a strange sight to see this bush just catch fire and it not burn like it's a healthy bush just on fire. I don't know if I would be tempted to run away from it, or if I'd be like it has to be fake. I should need to touch it to make sure it's real fire. I don't know how I would react. But I think it's interesting that God chose to talk to Moses through this. Another thing I think is interesting is that God talks to Moses through this burning bush. Moses is clearly afraid, but he talks to him about all these things. And in chapter 3, verse 11, Moses says to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out to Egypt?" Now granted, Pharaoh had just tried to kill him. Understandable why he'd be afraid to go back. But God also told him that everyone who wanted to kill him was dead. So then Moses does what I think is naturally a human thing. You start finding excuses as to why you shouldn't do or wouldn't want to do those things. So he talks about how the Israelites will reject him, and God's like, "It's okay, I got this. Listen, if they question you, this is what you say." So God is very patient and does this. But then God kind of loses patience. And he gets very upset with Moses because he's like, "I'm gonna be with you. Stop questioning it. Just do it," kind of thing. Before he does that, he shows signs for Moses to use. And one of the signs that caught my attention was the snake, where he throws down his staff and it becomes a snake. And God tells him to take it by the tail. Now, I don't know about you, but I would not want to go near a snake. It even says Moses ran from it. I would be running as well. But the fact that God asked him to take it by the tail, it spoke to me as sometimes God asks us to do things that aren't going to be easy for us, that may seem kind of dangerous. And there's a few ways we can react to it. Will we take it by the tail, or will we run from it? Remember, God is with you in everything. God didn't just take away the problem. He made Moses face the problem and was with him during that. So something later on, we see chapter 4, verse 18. It says, "Then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, 'Let me return to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive.' And Jethro said, 'Go, and I wish you well.'" I wanted to call attention to this because it's so different than how Laban treated Jacob. Laban was like, "Nah, work 7 more years for me, then you get this." Or, "No, you're profiting me," kind of thing. "I'm not letting you go." Jethro, which I think speaks a lot to Jethro's character, was like, "Go ahead, do it, take my daughter, just go ahead." Even though I know Moses was helping out around the house or around his flock, Jethro didn't even hesitate. He's like, "Just go," and he even wishes him well. I think that just speaks volumes for Jethro's character. Another parallel I want to put is God tells Moses everyone who wanted to kill him is dead, to return to Egypt. He also told Joseph in a dream while Joseph was in Egypt to go back because everyone who wanted to kill him was dead. I'm not talking about Joseph in the coat of many colors. I'm talking about Joseph, like Jesus' human dad. That Joseph was told in a dream by God, hey, you can return to Israel. So I think it's interesting, that parallel there. So something kind of strange happens. In chapter 4, verse 24, it says, at a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. And to me, that came out of left field. Like, I have no idea why God would... He gives Moses this amazing task that he's gonna do. And my first thought was maybe he's gonna kill Moses because he refused to do it. Maybe. But my Bible says that it was because Moses hadn't circumcised his son, which kind of explains the later verses of Moses' wife, Zipporah, performing the circumcision and putting her son's, skin on Moses' feet. And then God backs off, so I kind of sort of give that, but why was it included in the book of the Bible? Was it just to show how important circumcision is? I'm not sure, but it was kind of strange to me. The next verse, verse 27 in chapter 4, God talks to Aaron and says, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So God is already just putting things together, just one after another. Another thing is that Moses and Aaron show up, right? They talk to the elders. The elders were like, great, praise God. He knows about us. He's not forsaking us. Let's do this. And then hardship happens. Pharaoh says you have to make bricks without straw. The Israelites turn so fast against God, Moses, and Aaron. They're like, just stop talking. Just stop talking. We don't want this. Just let it be. And I found that so relatable or very human, I feel like. It's things could be going well for you. You'd be like, yes, this is awesome. And something hits, and you just, nope, doesn't matter anymore. Just going my own way. He never helped me anyway. And yet they don't see the full picture. I think Job is another example of this. He does the opposite. I think we should model ourselves after Job in the sense of he's doing well. God has blessed him tremendously, and then hardship happens, and instead of turning on God, Job is like, how can we praise God only in the good times? We should praise him in the bad times too. So I thought that was a good way of handling it. But I can totally understand why the Israelites would be like this, because it's hard. Hardships are hard for a reason. I think that's very relatable. So going on, I like that in chapter 6, it talks about the family record of Moses and Aaron, because, I mean, nowadays, Aaron and Moses are pretty common names. I'm sure you know of an Aaron at least, and maybe a Moses here and there, but back in that day, I'm sure there were bunches of Moseses and Aarons. So I like how this lays it out for you, and so you have no confusion as to who this Moses and Aaron were. You know, because it lays down their entire family lineage. I love that. And then we get to the plagues. So I was watching a documentary about the 12 plagues, and something I thought was interesting, because God does everything for a purpose. But it was saying that the Egyptians worshipped gods that should have had control over these plagues. For example, something that was very prominent was the sun god. as of right now, Aaron's doing pretty good. So, I think it's interesting that there are different kinds of rebelliousness, I guess. Some people refuse to acknowledge God's existence. Some people acknowledge his existence, but when trouble comes, they become disheartened and are like, where are you, God? And then some people know about him and are like, no, I'm not gonna do anything about it. And God could be like, no, you should be doing this. And they'd be like Jonah and the whale and go the complete opposite direction of it. And then there are those who hear it and go to it. It's like that New Testament story about the seed. The seed falling on good soil or being choked by thorns. I believe it's in the book of Matthew, I think, around chapter 13, I want to say. But it's a good parable. If you look up parable of the seed, it should show up. Not the mustard seed, but just the seeds in general. It should come up. It's a good story. I enjoy that parable. So another thing I wanted to call attention to was the magicians. So the magicians at first are able to replicate everything. And I have to laugh every time I read the part about the magician's staffs turning into snakes and then Aaron's snake eating theirs. For some reason I find that so funny. It's like, you thought kind of thing. It's like, yeah, sure, you can turn them into snakes, but can you make the snake do that? It's another way of God showing, hey, I'm the all-powerful one. This is just sorcery. What I'm doing is not sorcery. It's real. This is a miracle, not magic. It's not a trick. So as we continue through the stories, though, we see that the magicians falter. So, specifically, the plague of gnats. The magicians could not produce gnats, and we see this is where they recognize that God is God, but Pharaoh does not. I feel like Pharaoh, I don't want to say had a right to, but I feel like if you have proof that it's trickery, you're like, yeah, it's trickery because my magicians can do it. But now your magicians can't do it, so all your proof is stripped away. You have very wobbly legs to stand on. And yet Pharaoh is so stubborn, he continues to stand on the wobbly legs. So I thought that was interesting that the magicians recognized God as God, but Pharaoh did not. And then the boils, when they break out, the magicians couldn't even stand before Pharaoh because they had so many boils, and I'm sure it would have been, very painful for them to have that. So another thing I want to call attention to leads us to the big moment of Moses parting the Red Sea, or God parting the Red Sea. So they were trying to explain why would the Egyptians say, yeah, you can go, and then run after them, chasing them, prepared for war. That was their explanation. But in the Bible, it says God made the Egyptians favorably disposed to the Israelites. That is, they gave their jewelry to them. It wasn't the Israelites pillaging them for it. It was the Egyptians gave them their jewelry and such. I feel like this notion contradicts what the documentary was saying. If the Bible is to be believed, which I personally believe it is, then I don't think that's why the Egyptians followed the Israelites. I think the Egyptians followed the Israelites because Pharaoh was like, hold on, I'm Pharaoh. God had hardened his heart again, and God had made a way to perform miracles so that we could learn about it years and years later. It had a purpose, if you will. I don't think it was, hold on, we've been hoodwinked. I think it was Pharaoh's like, hey, I'm not gonna allow this to happen, and he chased after him. I don't know, but what the Bible says contradicts what this documentary said, is my point, I think. So anyway, that's about gonna wrap it up for me. I found while I was reading these passages that I remembered these passages differently, and this order of events happening differently than when I was reading. I'm like, hang on, that didn't happen till this, and then I read it and I was like, oh, I guess it did happen before I thought it had, or after I thought it had. So I found it a very good review for myself, because, you know, you grew up, or I grew up, listening to these stories, and listening to the 12 plagues and such, and to actually read them now as an adult, going back, it was a good review for me. So, let me know what you think. I am always up for some feedback, and I hope you all have a wonderful night, a wonderful